You are now listening to Asking for a Friend with TalkDoc, sharing insights through real, honest, and practical ways to improve your communication and relationships. Featuring your hosts, Dr. Pamela Kreiser, Meredith Edwards Nagel, and Teighlor Polendo.
So in this episode, we're going to talk about contempt. And you might remember, if you've listened to previous episodes, that there are 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that John Gottman, a very famous researcher in relationships, has identified. And these 4 horsemen are defensiveness, criticism, stonewalling, and contempt. Now, Gottman's quick to point out that these are 4 signals of the end of a relationship. So what does that mean? These are the lights that light up on your relationship dashboard. When you see these warning lights, Gottman says you're headed for trouble. So this episode is to circle out the last of the 4, which is about contempt. And essentially, contempt is disrespect. But here's what Gottman also says. He says this is the worst of the 4. So the greatest predictor of divorce is the presence of contempt in the relationship. And that makes it a pretty important topic. Gottman uses a pretty big phrasing around the idea of contempt. He says it's corrosive. He says that it's like sulfuric acid on a relationship. And I thought, wow, those are pretty big words.
Yeah. I feel like we don't hear the word contempt when you think about defensiveness, criticism. Stonewalling's different. You've come across it. Contempt, I think, I definitely agree with Gottman that it is the worst of the worst in so many ways. But it's this creepy, crawly little thing. It can get you if you're not focusing, or it can be on you if you're not realizing what someone's doing. It's just, anyway, so I know we have to get into what this beast is first.
For sure. Some describe it as a range of behaviors that express superiority or disdain or mockery.
Yeah. When we were looking at the research on this, is humor. Where does humor fall into this? Because they say that it's not funny, obviously, but just depending on your sense of humor as a couple, sometimes people give each other a hard time, and that's a way of what they find to be funny. But is it really just this masked, and that's their outlet for it?
No, I don't think so.
I would argue, I would argue, we can get into it more later, that he talks, there's something rooted behind it. Like our bickering episode, where some people, they bicker and jest. But I remember from that episode, if there's something more rooted between you two, even if it's just on one side, but if the contempt, verbal, nonverbals, we'll get into that more later, are in jest, it's different than if there's like a rooted issue. And that's where it's coming from.
I think the contrast would be, is it belittling or not? And I think when you're joking around, it isn't. If everybody's joking around.
You said the thing that got you, Dr. K, was the disrespect.
Yeah.
Something about that. I felt super highlighted by the lack of admiration, that part of your fondness, is that the right word? But your softness towards your partner to be gone, to have that gone. I think that somebody would have that towards me sounds so painful.
Yeah, that's a good thing to bring up. Lack of empathy, lack of understanding, lack of tenderness.
That's a good word. Tenderness. Like for the tenderness to go away to then become disrespect. Oh, I don't want to live in that room where that happens.
Yeah, I would guess that there's some of us that would recognize contempt, but I would think there might be other people, even some listening, that might say it became normal and maybe they stopped noticing it.
Yeah. Or you grew up in a house like this where it was normal.
Yeah.
You didn't even notice it till someone you dated called you out.
Yeah, that's good. And just that was a normal way to speak to each other, which Gottman would say, if it's normal, it's going to be the end of the relationship.
Yeah.
We consider it a red flag, and we've talked about that idea. Obviously, a very big red flag. And it's something for us to think about from both standpoints, receiving the contempt and then also giving the contempt. And I love the idea of the lack of tenderness and how that is what it communicates. There's 2 ways that we might see contempt played out. We have verbal and nonverbal. We should talk about the verbal ways, the words that people could say that would be contempt.
And these seems like sarcasm. So when you're mocking or belittling your partner's actions, thoughts, or feelings. Let's say we have an example. If your partner suggests a solution to a problem and you respond, oh yeah, because that always works so well.
A sarcastic tone.
In a sarcastic tone, yeah. The tone's going to be big on that one.
Okay. Another example of verbal contempt would be name calling. So calling someone an idiot, a loser, or even lazy. Just those identity attacks in the form of words, labels, where you're labeling the other person.
Of all the verbal lists, this one stuck out to me the most. It was mocking or mockery, right? So it's making fun of what your partner is interested in, their hobbies or aspirations. An example would be like ridiculing their taste in music, their goals.
I don't think I would have thought of that as contempt.
It could be experienced that way, though.
Yeah, no, for sure. Okay, belittling comments. This is minimizing or dismissing your partner's feelings, opinions, or experiences. This can include saying things like, you're overreacting, or that's not a big deal, or you're just too sensitive. That just takes all the wind out of someone. You're saying how they're feeling. You're making a lot of assumptions with that.
I thought minimizing and dismissing feelings is pretty interesting. So you're like making them smaller.
Yeah.
I can't help with this episode and all this I'm learning about this is I didn't know the word for it growing up. But this is the language. Maybe people are listening. You're like, oh, that's what that thing was. Yeah.
If you're in that situation, especially as a kid, and you're to say something back, then they're just going to come back with more. Oh, I was just joking. Oh, you don't get it. Oh, you're too. Yeah. It's just,
you can't take a joke.
It could be present like bullying, honestly, if you continued it on in a pattern where you could be harassing somebody in that way. I remember as a kid being told I was too sensitive. And as an adult, when I look back on that, I was like, or was that good that I was sensitive? I would hate to be called someone who was insensitive. But as a kid, you don't have the tools to manage that. So another form of verbal contempt, blaming or criticizing. So that obviously creeps over to the criticism horse that is the demise of the relationship too.
Yeah.
Examples, you never do anything right, or you're the reason everything is wrong in this relationship. Obviously, those are very destructive things to say.
Can it be the reverse of that? Like someone going, oh, I can never do anything right.
That would be victimhood.
Okay.
I think that does happen. I don't think that's this. This is where I'm putting that on you. I'm blaming you or criticizing you. Yeah.
Okay. I get it. Passive aggressive, like subtle jabs, right? Like backhanded compliments, things that convey this, it's this underlying hostility, right? Oh, that's so cute that you think you're helping. And your partner tries to clean something and they do it not well. Load the dishwasher wrong. We've been there on this podcast. I think it's just that underlying like little jab. This one that kills me is like people that really know you in a relationship, they feel it. And you think that people don't notice. People notice.
That's funny.
Okay. Have you ever witnessed that with couples where you're like, there's something going on here? Very uncomfortable.
Okay. Another verbal form would be dismissive language. So when you use dismissive language or a tone to show lack of interest or respect to your partner's thoughts or contributions, I guess it can be like, whatever, I don't care, it's not so important.
It's almost blends with that belittling where it's lowering you. It's putting you like, you're to this, or that's not that big a deal. You need to calm down. It's like someone putting their hand up and just like, shh, over there.
I think that's good. Yeah. Another one would be contemptuous humor. So that's using humor in a way that ridicules your partner, often at their expense. So you might make jokes about their weaknesses or past mistakes or insecurities. I just think that's cruel.
Nasty.
I take all these verbal ones together. Here's what I keep hearing the word you. So you're lazy. Your hobbies are dumb. You're overreacting. You're not doing it right. You're not whatever. We don't talk about their behavior. It's not, it's important that you sweep the floor like this, or I don't like the way you're sweeping the floor and talking about the behavior. It's, you're lazy, or you're just bad at doing chores. Notice the difference is you based. I'm not coming after your behavior. I'm coming after you. And we know from other podcast episodes, when people perceive attacks on their identity, they're going to perceive an escalation in the conflict. That's just going to happen.
And then I'm going to guess that all these horsemen go together. So if I perceive this attack after you've just judged me, everything I do is wrong, I'm going to then become defensive and then probably stonewall. And then
you're going to criticize me.
They criticize you like, oh, look at you. You're such a stonewaller. I love hearing that. They all just.
So we're like rallying the horses, all the horsemen together.
Realizing.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
For sure. I think it's hard once it starts to get out of it. That's what I read when we were preparing for this episode. The contempt is hard to not have it go bad very quickly.
That's our verbal example list. We're going to do the
I
nonverbal
thought the
ones.
nonverbal ones were interesting. So remember, these are behaviors that we do that are without the words. And these also convey that superiority.
I'll take the first one because I might have been known to do this one on occasion. My very dear member of my family, their marital advice was don't marry anyone who rolls their eyes at you. I was like, oh, shit. I've done that. But sometimes I just feel like I need a good eye roll. Yeah. I think I just did it, actually. Someone said something I thought was ridiculous, and I just walked out and had to roll my eyes. I was like, oh my gosh, what some words coming out of your mouth
I don't know the tip, though, unless you roll your eyes to the person. But I'm a closet eye roller. Yeah, we're good.
Yeah.
Oh, we're good. We're good then. Okay. Closet it. Okay.
I love that we're giving each other a pass.
The reason it would be bad is that other person sees you show the disrespect.
I'm just sneaky disrespectful.
Comforting. Okay, the second one is sneering or smirking. If you make a facial expression that shows like a scorn, think of curling your lip or just a smirk. Like you ever heard somebody say, wipe that smirk off your face?
That's a famous parent thing.
Things like
wipe that look off your face. This is making me think of siblings, where you might mock or belittle the other person you're communicating with by mimicking them, saying, like some kind of mimicking imitation that would be seen as offensive.
Yeah. This one I think is interesting, avoiding eye contact, because people avoid eye contact for a lot of different reasons. But this would be refusing to make eye contact during a conversation, which would signal disinterest, disrespect, or a lack of engagement. So that's not really I'm nervous, can't meet your gaze, or I'm awkward.
And it means that my message is not worthy of your attention.
Thanks.
I think that goes with the next one pretty well. I connect to these, like physically turning away from someone during a discussion or an argument, like moving your body, showing that you've emotionally detached or there's no desire to engage. I experienced this as a kid where I'd be emotionally charged as a child, and then this person would just leave the room. I was in the middle of it. Oh, I do with that. Except for just feel very small, very small.
Yeah.
Which I think is a goal. It's like, I'm detaching from you. I'm disengaging. It's not worth it. It's that I don't need to look at you. I don't need to be in the presence of you right now. I'm going to do what I want.
It's something that I had to really work with our kids on. We used to talk about how sighing excessively was a disrespectful sound. And we would talk about that. I think there's a few different ways you can do it, but I think role-playing what would be the appropriate behavior is probably one of the things I would suggest. Instead of saying it that way, is there a way that you could say it that would express how you're feeling rather than how you're judging what I'm saying? Occasionally, I may or may not have been known to kick the kid out of the house and make them come back in again, starting over. Oh, yeah.
Oh, let's redo this moment right now.
Yeah. I would say, hey, so try that again. Go all the way outside. Come in as a different you. And sometimes we do it a few times.
I think that's a really good parenting note, though, like positive reinforcement versus the negative. Show me the positive. Show me the way to do it.
And they get it, I think. And the role playing is not the worst because they have to hear how that sounds and see how that sounds negatively. And in the working through it, become engaging in the positive behaviors.
Yeah, which I like. So you're allowing them that you can have the feeling that you're having. You can express yourself. There's just sometimes a different option that isn't. Have you ever been around a child or adult? I actually recently was around an adult with their parent, and that you hear this. Okay. Towards their parent. I avoided eye contact. I was like, I cannot engage. I must disengage in this moment. This is so uncomfortable.
And you're watching it. You're watching a crime.
Yes.
Right? A communication
crime. I don't like it. We're not making that a thing. I literally just had this moment where I felt like Dr. K. We were all on Mean Girls, and she was trying to make fetch happen. It was like, you committed a communication crime. What the fuck? the coolest, nerdiest thing you've ever said. I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead, Teighlor. Were you going to do the next one?
Sure. Okay. Next, we have interrupting or talking over your partner. Not allowing your partner to speak or constantly interrupting them during conversations, which demonstrates a lack of respect for their thoughts and opinions. I think we talk about this a lot. Mary, sometimes you get so excited about something and you'll interrupt and they're like, I'm not ready for you to start talking. You're like, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to disrespect you.
Yeah, I want them to keep going.
Yeah.
I hope my husband listens to this and I'll really try to wait. But I think that's the intent behind this.
I don't know if you mean to do it, but if you're doing it regularly, it does show that disrespect.
Okay, so that's a good point. So if you've lost the tenderness towards someone, you don't care to think about if you're disrespecting them. If you're talking over them, you don't have that softness towards them, where I would hope, in my example, and pray that I'm doing better. But I would hope that person would go, oh, okay, she's just excited about the conversation together. She's getting my space back or my turn back.
Okay.
So we have 2 left. Dismissing body language. So things like crossing your arms, looking away, leaning away, signaling a closed off or dismissive attitude. Is there any other examples of this?
What about looking at your watch?
I feel like that's just like embodied in all things.
Yeah. That's dismissive.
Or picking up your phone.
I'd rather talk to anyone else besides you. My phone gives me access to everyone besides you.
That's okay.
So we know John Gottman studied this for a long time. He did a lot of early studies in around the 2000s on contempt, essentially understanding what contempt is and then what does it do to erode the trust, the intimacy, the mutual understanding in the relationship. His studies basically show all of that it erodes trust. It is a great predictor of divorce. They did a study in 1994 that really showed that this eye rolling and sneering and different things were really strong predictors of marital distress and divorce. Not surprising, right? Yeah.
Damn. Yeah. Sorry. I'm just like, I have a moment with some of this when it just like, you think about people in your life and you just wonder, did you not see it coming?
So that's always my question is, did you start out this way? I always wonder, even looking at like my parents, I'm like, I didn't know you at the beginning of your relationship. So I'm always curious, was it always this way or where does it come from? Is this just modeled for them? And so they've always acted this way towards each other. Something happened. Sure. What is it that builds this up in a relationship? Where do you go from that? You're the person I love the most. I'm committing my life to you. To I hate your guts.
Yeah. What I would say is for whatever reason, those behaviors, I think, become repetitive and normalized. And that's not good. And that's that erosion that occurs. So I don't know if that comes from having it modeled by people ahead of them. I think the thing that I would say about Gottman's research that's so compelling really is in the infectious disease area. So the famous study that he did was involving the videotapes of couples who were showing contempt. And when you turn down the volume of the things that they were saying, because we know nonverbal carries more meaning, right? When they turned it down, they started cataloging. So the researchers would rate the contempt levels in the videos. And then what they did is they followed the people who were seeing these contempt faces. So this is the partner of the contempt person. They followed them for 4 years and found that it was a strong and significant predictor of infectious disease. It was replicated later at Ohio State, where they did a set of research where they looked at what happened in terms of your body's resistance to cancer or your immune response, and found significantly lower if you had experienced this contempt. And that's the person who's taking that contempt in. Yeah.
Wow.
So we're not surprised that it would ultimately
killing your partner.
Be a breakup, right? Because you're making me sick if you're giving me these things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dang.
I know.
It's
it's pretty profound. And I think if you're listening to this and you're thinking, oh, I'm exposed to contempt from this person in my life, I might suggest that you evaluate that and make some choices out of that realization. I'm not saying to do anything. You decide if you want to do something, but it would be worth evaluating.
I think it's super powerful that the research basically showed that contempt predicts. People are always like, how do I make sure that my relationship lasts?
Yeah.
This is predicting that it's going to end. Like, here's an example of something that will, that's why I was saying earlier in the beginning, it's this creepy crawly like thing then you said it, Dr. K, that it's repetitive and normalized. If you're not careful and these things keep happening over and over and you've normalized them in your relationship, here's a way to find out that your relationship's going to end. There's so much research behind this, and just, wow, just like checking on yourself too. Am I giving these verbals or nonverbals towards my partner? Am I having an attitude above them, or disrespecting them, or losing my tenderness towards them?
You shared some articles with us, and doctors, is it Stosny? He's written some books.
The harmful consequences of contempt. Okay.
But he talks about that. I thought this was interesting to diagnose if you have contempt. And I feel like this is a lot of behavior misconduct, is that normally what your outward expression is really something you're feeling inward. So while it's aimed at someone else, you are feeling bad about yourself. So you aim outwards, but really it's you needing to address what's going on within you. And I thought this was interesting. He says the adrenaline of contempt often masks depression by temporarily increasing energy.
That part blew my mind.
The trouble is you have to stay contemptuous most of the time to avoid the crash back to a depressed mood. You're trying to get out of, maybe you're not feeling great. You don't want to feel depressed, so you are contemptuous, and it gives you this rush of adrenaline. But then you have to keep doing it. And what was most interesting about contempt is that you project it onto other people. So contempt is extremely contagious and highly influenced by projection. So if you're around a contemptuous person, you're likely to become more contemptuous.
Yeah, that part. Yeah.
So we can have this article linked in the show notes.
Yeah.
But the good news, his antidote to contempt is compassion. And that is also contagious. You want to surround yourself essentially with compassionate people, and you'll be more likely to be compassionate. And I feel like I've definitely experienced that. When you're just around good people, don't you just act kinder, and what they're putting out into the world, you take in and then put out again?
Community is huge.
But what he said is that contempt is a way of avoiding vulnerability. And once that's embedded in your defense system, a change in the partner's behavior will not alter it. Even if your partner does everything you want them to do, you'll just wish they'd done it sooner. So as long as that is your reaction to things, if you're a contemptuous person, like, it doesn't matter what the other person will do. This is something you have to change within yourself. And I thought it was crazy. He said one thing: if you're a contemptuous person, you often want to just diagnose your partner, and you just start finding all these flaws within them, and you will go on the internet. He said it's the person who goes on the internet and diagnoses all these things wrong with their partner. And to be honest, I cannot tell you, just as a young girl around a lot of women who were going through divorces, that's all they did. And they just said, he's this and he's that, and they had all these diagnosed problems.
Wow.
But I'm going to be honest, I really think these women were filled with contempt towards their spouse.
Yeah.
And it was, in fact, a high predictor of divorce. They all got divorced.
I was just going to pull from Susan Heightened, and she did the article about how contempt destroys relationships. She asked a question in this article: how do parents teach their children empathy or contempt? And that it would be one or the other even. And I was like, what is that? This was something I didn't think about that much. But now as a parent, I'm like, oh, did I receive that as a lesson or normative or repeat pattern or whatever? And is there a way I'm not noticing I'm giving this to my child by how I treat their other parents?
Didn't she say that you can model contempt and they'll learn contempt, but you can model empathy and they still might learn contempt?
Yeah.
They'll learn empathy, but they also could still learn contempt. Like, you have to model empathy.
Oh boy.
They need to see that. But you don't necessarily have to model contempt, and they can still learn that.
Yes.
So we just really need to be honing in on this empathy piece.
Yeah, I also liked in the article that she talked about there's like a feeling of safety and not safety. I like that she discussed that in a relationship that doesn't have contempt, there's is feeling of safety versus a relationship with contempt. Unsafe nature that like the person is looking at you like, I'm fine, but you're not. It's that you thing that you were talking about earlier. and you feel that on yourself, you know? Also, just that contempt shows their sign of rejection, which I thought was interesting. We talked about just the losing the tenderness. I don't know why that word just sticks with me so much during this. The lack of respect, all of that. If you felt this on you from a partner or person in your life, you feel like you're being rejected. And so sometimes I think it's almost like this sick cycle where you keep coming back to seek the acceptance and you keep getting rejected. And like what you were saying, Taylor, you're not the person that has contempt has to change themselves. So if you're constantly coming back to be what that person wants or what they need, I'm guilty of this and in a past relationship. I'm like, I'll do all the things, but still they're not happy. And then you just constantly are like, when am I going to do all the things right?
So I did a little deep dive on what John Gottman has to say about this. I found what he had to say so fascinating.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So one, they found in their studies that if you did intervention, if you had outside help, it could be helped. So there is hope out there. So you want to say that. The second thing that I found interesting, for many years, they tried to figure out when contempt appeared, what would be the thing that would make it okay, the solution for it. And they compared what they called the masters of marriage. Those are people that have good marriages versus the disasters of marriage, which are the people with bad marriages. And when they look at those two groups, they basically find that the masters, when contempt appears, they're able to do a good relationship repair. So then they started saying, okay, so what makes a good relationship repair? Let's study that. Yeah. What is that? Because it could happen. You could have an eye roll or an insult that happens. And so it's like, what do the good marriages do to resolve that? And he said, so we spent all these years trying to figure out what made a perfect relationship repair, and we weren't successful at identifying it. Because sometimes they would have someone do a crappy repair and it would work, and someone would do an elegant repair and it wouldn't work. And they couldn't figure out the difference until they figured this out. He said it all comes down to the emotional bank. So he said, basically, the contempt is a little withdrawal. And if you don't have enough money in the bank, you're going to be in real trouble on that. So what he said is you have to continually fill up the bank with the tender behaviors. And if I have the bank filled, he said even the worst repair attempt would actually work because the bigger math is working. And that is that you're being careful to be a good, trusted partner most of the time. So when you did this dumb thing, it's more forgivable because I got your back and we're on good for the long term. And I had money in the bank, so it can be spent. I thought that was pretty interesting because it gives us a wider zoom out on the topic. When I zoom out of contempt, what am I doing collectively in this relationship? And am I feeding this relationship so that it's emotionally healthy for when the mistakes are made? And that's what he really found was the difference between the masters and the disasters.
Yeah. Damn, that's a really good question. We need to ask ourselves this. Like, ask your own self this before you point and ask your partner. How am I filling the bank in my relationship? How am I showing up so that when I make a mistake, there's trust behind that? It's not just because I said so and because we've been together for so long, you should just know.
And that gives me hope because it was concerning to me. I'm like, I'm not perfect. And so I've definitely made those mistakes. That makes a lot of sense to me that if I'm filling up and doing all the other things, then hopefully I'll have some grace for those slip ups.
What I hear of all of this and what you're saying, Taylor, reminds me of what Dr. K has told us before, whether here or just in our lives, that the more you're in relationship, the riskier it gets. So the more you have to show up, right? So if you're putting in the work more and you're telling your partner that I'm here for you and you're showing up for them in smaller ways or bigger ways, you hope that there's the receipt on the other side, which is, I do trust.
I would leave us with this. He said, the issues in these relationships is that you want to move from a culture of criticism to creating a culture of appreciation, which goes to a lot of the themes that we talked about in this episode. So he said, stop looking for what's missing and start appreciating what's there. Once again, thank you for joining us today. Please remember to rate, share, and subscribe to our podcast. And thank you for listening to Asking for a Friend.
Let us know what you thought of the episode. Our email is hello@afafpodcast.com. This show is for educational purposes only and is copyrighted. Written permission must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting. Thanks for listening to Asking for a Friend with TalkDoc.